Let me tell you a story of a girl I once came across. I will name her Ivy. And Ivy was 14, but she was coming from a very poor background, just like most families in Malawi. And as per tradition, she was supposed to be married off to a man who was to provide for her basic needs and the family's needs. So she was married off to this man, 35. He owned a shop, and he made her life really miserable. So soon after getting married, she fell pregnant, and the husband was constantly and frequently beating her. But Ivy would not report this to the police. For then, the police will have to arrest the husband, and she will have to lose her only source of income. Ivy is now 22, has 3 children, and is expecting the 4th. I would like you to imagine with me, what were you doing when you were 14? Probably going to school and spending some quality time with friends and family, and obviously not thinking of getting married or having babies. But unfortunately, Ivy's story is a story of 1 million girls around the world who are forced into child marriages because of lack of empowerment in their communities. My name is Memory Mbewe. I'm a child rights activist from Malawi, and this would have been my story too. But this morning, I will tell you how I turned out to be different. So I was born to a very, very young mother in a little district called Balaka in the southern part of Malawi. And I spent the early years of my life with my grandparents. But I was very privileged to have an aunt who lived far off in the city, and she would visit every once in a while. And somehow, her story on how she turned out to be different from everybody I knew fascinated me. And before long, she became my role model, my inspiration, and she showed me how it was possible to break away from what is traditionally expected of women and girls in my society. And she made me to believe in my dream and to pursue them no matter what. But that's not the case, that it's not an option for most girls in my community. About 10% of the girls, they are married before they get to 15. And 42%, which is more or less close to half, they are married before they get to 18. And the reasons are so many. We live in a society where 50% of the population lives in extreme poverty. So girls are married off in order to ease financial burdens on families. And sometimes they are married off to be offered a better future. I'm sure you can understand as a parent that you don't want to see your child starving to death. So it's an option for them. They had to make these decisions as parents. And we live in a society where girls are raised to be brides, and getting married on a part of a girl is an accomplishment. And there's lack of awareness. Most children and parents themselves, they do not know they have rights. And those that know they have rights, they have to make the tough decisions, as I've already talked about. And even for children who are forced into marriages, most of them do not know who to turn to or where to turn to for help. And we live in a society where customs and traditions have created myth to say that if you have reached puberty or if you have found yourself pregnant, then you are ready for marriage. And somehow, because there's lack of knowledge on sexual reproductive health, there are very, very high numbers of teen pregnancies, which eventually leads to child marriages. And these marriages rob so many of the rights of these children. Their right to education is taken away from them. Their right to good health. Their right just to be children and play. You know what I'm talking about. A happy child is fascinating to look at. But all that is taken away from them. And their right and their chance to become financially independent at some point in life is taken away from them. And most of them, their right to safety is also taken away from them. And like Ivy, they are exposed to gender-based violence. And for me, as an activist, what the saddest part about this whole thing is that most of these girls cannot consciously return back home to their parents because there's nothing to return to. So, about 3 years ago, while I was helping school kids with my fellow friends, we got in touch with a local TV and radio station so that we could cover more people on the work that we were doing. And while we were there at Timveni, I found myself learning how to be on air. And I was eventually invited to do a program called Hear Us Out, where I used the platform to bring the voices of children and youth to the masses and to advocate for the rights of children and youth of my country. And I used the platform to speak for people who cannot speak for themselves. It is fascinating because through this platform, almost every week, I get contacted by boys and girls in my community who have somehow faced one or two of the consequences of child marriages, possibly those that are struggling with childbirth complications, and girls that give birth to a lot of children because they would like to please the husband, and those that go to bed on an empty stomach because the husband has refused to provide for them. And of course, those that call within my show and say, if I knew of what you're talking about today before now, my life would have been different. So you can imagine, it's even sad for me. I believe that the only reason I found myself on the different side of the coin, or that my life turned out to be different, is because I had somebody to look up to, a role model, which most of these girls do not have, and somebody who believed in me and somehow offered me the opportunities that I needed as a girl to make it in life. But as I've already stated out, this is not an option for most girls and boys in my community. And so, as a child rights activist, I also engage with stakeholders and policymakers to find a way on how we can influence policy and somehow try to bring a change in the community. I am glad that there are positive changes that are coming through. Like now, we have children that are abandoning their marriages and returning to school. We have young mothers beginning support groups for themselves. We have victims now opening up to learn income-generating skills. We have women coming forward to report gender-based violence. And of course, we have children and young people knowing of their rights and responsibilities. And sometimes they send us advocacy materials so that we can use, these are things that they have been able to come up with from the skills and the talents that they have. So they send songs or poems, paintings, and etc., so that they can help in the fight to improve the lives of other young people. Despite all this, there's still a lot of work to be done on the ground. We have made progress, yes, but it is small progress. And I think all of you here can become a part of the progress that needs to be made. You can engage with local grassroots activists and support youth-led initiatives like the one I'm doing. Join hands with organizations like Plan International that supports youth-led initiatives like mine to reach out to these boys and girls to make sure that you help to break the cycle. And in this way, you will be able to provide alternatives for these girls. Because as you have heard from my saying, most of these girls, they do not have alternatives. So by you joining in hands, you'll be able to provide alternatives for them to say, don't marry young, but at least do this. And I believe my country needs a lot of girls to grow up to be women like my aunt, who know that they have rights to choose who to marry and when to marry, how many number of children, to know that they have a chance to be financially independent. And to know that they can influence the next generation. They have a right, they have a chance to influence the next generation. And personally, I look forward to the day where women and girls in my community have a chance to exercise their freedom and to live their rights. And just like my aunt inspired me to be who I am today, I look forward to inspire the next generation of women in my country. Thank you.
Good morning. My favorite part of the Oslo Freedom Forum is the feeling of a community and a family. And 2 years ago, I had a chance encounter on an airplane, probably one of my happiest reservation accidents. I sat next to this young couple where this smiling young lady immediately knew that I was going to the Oslo Freedom and engaged me in a conversation. And that conversation at that time, I didn't know where it's going to lead. Fast forward 2 years, and I've built one of my most meaningful relationship through the Young Oslo Scholar Program, which brings every year 10 students to the community. And since that encounter, lo and behold, Margaret became my personal protege. And in my own hour of need, me, the veteran activist, I found that the first person that leapt to my support was young Margaret.
Thank you, everybody. So as Nasser introduced me, my name is Margaret. I'm currently a senior at Wellesley College, but I'm set to graduate in 2 days. Woo! Thank you. And my time as an Oslo scholar, and with the Oslo Freedom Forum at large, has fundamentally changed the way I see the world. It has introduced me to some of the most remarkable people I have ever met. It has forced me to think really critically about the way I see the world and the way I try to help it. And it's supported me as I've come to define my role as an activist and the ways I can best serve the community that I've come to love. So if you have any questions about the Oslo Scholars Program, please come and find me and Nasser during the next day, and we're happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next talk will be translated. Please put on your headsets.
اینجا هم هستن نگاه اینا بچهای معتادن برای ترک یا نه؟
خمار دارم چند دقیقه سیستم میزنم من
آبا چند؟ ترک میکنی؟
اللهم صل علی محمد و آل محمد
ای خاک در روی تو شده
جوانی که کار نداره، امنیت روانی نداره، امنیت مالی نداره، امنیت جانی نداره، اون معتاد نشه چی شود؟ من فکر میکنم که اگر ما تشبیه شویم به پولی هستم که یک تعداد آدم عبور میکنن برای اینکه یک زندگی دوباره تجربه کنن.
سلام.
Hello.
10 سال پیش
About 10 years ago,
وقتی از آوارگی و مهاجرت به کشورم بازگشتم
when I returned back to my country from being a refugee, my first view of Kabul was from a frightening place. underneath the burned bridge. This bridge was the place, meeting place for drug users and drug dealers. Under the bridge was filthy. The water stemming from baths and toilets poured here. Addicts washed and bathed themselves in this dirty water. Amongst the heaps of garbage, they searched for a morsel of food as one obsessed by searching for diamonds. And if anything couldn't be eaten, they would burn it to keep themselves warm. My eyes were open to a hell on earth, in a city where thousands of Afghan international aid workers lived. And this was where I found my brother Hakim. I come from Afghanistan, a country primarily known for its history of terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, and long-standing war and conflict. But less talked about is the fact that Afghanistan is the world's largest producer of opium. Terrorist groups financed by drugs kill thousands of children, women, and men each and every year, and use drug money to continue waging war. Through dealing with the consequences of war, addiction, discrimination, and violence, I have found one possible path toward peace and recovery. When I found my brother under the bridge, I found myself in a difficult position. I was determined to help him beat his addiction and live a better life. But there was a deeper and more important underlying issue. Could I ignore the hell I had witnessed? As I helped my brother battle addiction, I learned about the scope of the drug abuse crisis in Afghanistan. More than 12% of the Afghan population use drugs. Yet, the issue of drug abuse victims was not at all important to the Afghan government nor addressed by international donors. Meanwhile, the prohibition of drugs has led the public to have an inhuman view of addicts. Despised as morally deviant thieves and criminals, my brother and other addicts were utterly forgotten and alone. The problems my country faces are multi-layered and need to be tackled at many levels. Because of the complexity of these issues, the victims of war are often forgotten. So I started the Mother Camp, an empowerment and drug rehabilitation center, a place that changed my life. At Mother Camp, we do not confront drug smugglers and producers. That responsibility lies with the government and global institutions. We work with those who have been forgotten in this strategy, the addicts themselves. At Mother Camp, most of our patients' lives have been directly shaped by war. Soldiers, war refugees forced to flee and now return to their country, youth living in a deprived, war-torn country who turn to drugs for relief. We have treated over 5,000 addicts to overcome their addiction, among which 1,316 remain clean and lead a healthy life. By raising awareness about the plight of these victims of war, providing them continuous mental health services, compassion, and empowerment, we hope to free them of their drug addiction. We want to persuade them to help others in their community who struggle with addiction. Some of our recovered patients work at Mother Camp or have established independent camps of their own. Working at Mother Camp has shown me how responsibly treating the consequences of war with compassionate care and empowering its victims has the potential to help heal Afghan society. I employ some of the Mother Camp's recovered patients at my restaurant, Taj Bagum, the proceeds of which fund the Mother Camp Rehabilitation Center. Working at the restaurant gives my patients a chance to earn a living and increase their self-confidence, and this can help change their perception in our society. I have struggled my entire life against discrimination based on my gender. Through Taj Begum, the first woman-owned restaurant in Afghanistan, we have attracted individuals who want to change and improve society. Taj Begum has given me financial independence, freedom, and self-confidence, and allowed me to show up strong in society and to fight for my ideals and rights. I have seen how gender discrimination is pervasive and widespread. Every year, at least 5,000 cases of violence against women are recorded by the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission. I have also seen how misogyny is interconnected with other problems, including drug addiction. For example, in 2012, I worked with a family which all of its members, including the children, were addicted to drugs. The females of this family were subjected to sexual exploitation and violence by their drug dealers. When a woman becomes an addict, her situation is far more horrific than that of a male addict. 1/3 of addicts in Afghanistan are women, but they do not have the resources or support to stand up to this form of exploitation. As a result, many women cannot imagine a way out of this violence. Because of their addiction, they get used to this lifestyle. The problems of Afghanistan, such as fundamentalism, war, drug addiction, are interconnected. And solutions must be such that address these problems comprehensively. In order to help these women, I have decided to open a second rehabilitation center, Mother Camp. During a war, it is easy to believe that an average citizen cannot make a difference. And all that we can do is focus on survival. But caring, compassion, and empowerment can be powerful tools in dealing with the consequences of war. Giving someone a job, providing them access to medical care, giving them some tough love, these can bring about huge changes. When we refuse to let the victims of war be forgotten, when we are able to support one another, then we can make a big change in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. و در آخر درخواستی از همه شما
I have a
فعالان
request
حقوق بشر
from all
دارم.
of you human rights activists.
18 سال پیش طالبان در افغانستان
18 years ago, the Taliban in Afghanistan
زنان را حذف کردند.
eliminated women.
و این روزها گفتگوی صلح با طالبان جریان
And
دارد.
these days, peace talks are underway with the Taliban.
و ما زنان افغانستان
Us
با توجه
Afghan
به
women,
گفتگوی صلحی که جریان دارد
regarding
بنا
these
هست که
peace
برگردیم
talks,
به 18
are
سال پیش
supposed to go back to
زمانی که
18 years
طالبان در
ago
افغانستان بود.
when the Taliban ruled in Afghanistan.
از شما میخواهم که زنان
I
افغانستان
request
را حمایت کنید.
I request that you support the Afghan women. Be the voice of be our voices.
از طریق سوشال مدیا، از طریق رسانه ها،
I can't hear her.
مخصوصا
I
زنان
can't hear her.
جهان، زنان افغانستان را فراموش نکنید. با بازگشت طالبان مطمئناً کشتار بزرگی
there will be again a lot of killings and much tragedy. To prevent this tragedy and these killings and this elimination, support the Afghan women. Thank you.
Questions and you answer yes or no. Does Russia have a systematic statewide doping system in place to cheat the Olympics?
Yes.
Were you the mastermind of a statewide system that cheated the Olympics?
Yes.
Russia won 81 total medals in London. How many of those were dirty?
Or even more. 50%, that's for sure.
Was Putin aware of the existence of a Russian doping system?
Yes.
This goes all the way back to 1968. There never was anti-doping in Russia, ever.
To everything, we gave credibility to the lab. Do you think that I feel good today? Do you think that the athletes who were cheated feel good?
I thought I'd seen a lot. Like, this is next level.
Today, the World Anti-Doping Agency suspended Russia's sports drug testing lab, and the head of the lab resigned.
They were all doping, every single one of them. Unfortunately, the drugs work.
I know that I could change the past telling the truth.
Gregory is believed to be the #1 on Putin's kill list. They are actively hunting him. They have asked the Trump administration to extradite him.
We're here to get everything out.
But there were KGB people hanging around the lab. You know, KGB people are not nice people.
2 people connected with the Russian doping program are already dead under circumstances that seem highly suspect.
You want to get out?
Yes. We have to disclose.
The repercussions and political consequences are still unfolding.
It was a bombshell that has the potential of affecting the credibility of all sport and therefore the continued viability of all sport.
Dr. Rodoshenkov was telling the truth. I was able to corroborate that because of all of the scientific and forensic information.
It can be a defining moment, and I think it should. Why would I watch an event that's fixed?
Respect the rules. Play fair. Be clean. Hoorah!
Icarus, consider truth.
Hi, so my journey of making this film and winning an Academy Award is a kind of crazy one. I grew up in Colorado. Normal parents. My father was a lawyer, my mom was a housewife, and I wanted to be a professional cyclist. And I raced my bike through college, and when I was 19 years old, I was in this horrific accident, and I lose 8 teeth. I go through 8 root canals. My entire college was with plastic teeth in my mouth. And I start thinking that maybe there's a better career for me. And I move out to Los Angeles, and I'm 22 years old right after I finish college, and I decide that I'm going to be a stand-up comic. And that turns into acting, and the acting turns into writing, and the writing eventually turns into directing, and I create this play. And the play is called Jewtopia, and it's about a Christian guy that wants to marry a Jewish girl so he'll never have to make another decision. And needless to say, in Los Angeles, it's a huge hit. And then we go to New York, and we play for 3.5 years. And I go on and do a book that I tour around the country with. I have traveling productions of the show. and then I direct a film adaptation of the movie. And the film adaptation was a nightmare. I didn't take good money into it. It was considered a flop. And here I was, almost 40 years old, and I was in what I call director's jail. And I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, and I didn't know how I was going to pick up those pieces. And so I went back to essentially riding my bicycle, and that was me when I was 13 years old at a cycling camp. And this became my therapy. And as I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life, and of course I was also, obsessed with Lance Armstrong, who had won the Tour 7 times. And as I'm trying to figure out what the next phase of my life is going to be, Armstrong comes out in the beginning of 2013, and he confesses to doping his entire career. But what was so shocking to me about this, being a cyclist my whole life, was not that he had doped. I mean, I figured all these guys had doped. But what was so shocking was this guy had passed 500 doping controls clean. To this day, he's actually never been caught for doping. And the only way that they actually get the guy is through a criminal investigation. And in the investigation, his own teammates rat him out, who did the exact same thing as he did their entire careers, in exchange for their own immunity. So I start going to myself, wait. Not what's wrong with Lance Armstrong, why should we be mad at Lance Armstrong, but what is wrong with the anti-doping system in all of sport that would allow the most tested athlete on planet Earth to get through 500 tests clean. So I come up with this idea, and the idea is that I'm going to race my bike clean in the hardest race in Europe, it's amateur race in Europe, and then the next year I'm going to go back and dope. And I'm going to beat all of the doping tests and prove to the world that the global anti-doping system in sport, not cycling, is a fraud, because if amateur Brian Fogel can get through all the tests clean, well, what does that mean for every athlete, like an Usain Bolt, et cetera, et cetera? My challenge was to find a scientist, and I find this guy, Gregory Rodchenkov, and at the time, he's running the Moscow laboratory, which is in charge of all of the testing for every single Russian athlete. He had also done all the testing for the 2014 Sochi Olympic Games. And this is amazing, and we start corresponding, and I go and meet this guy in Oregon, and I tell him about my plan, and I ask him if he'll help me dope and evade the anti-doping controls, and he goes, "Yes, it would be my pleasure." And I go, this is absolutely crazy. The head of a Russian anti-doping program is going to help me dope and evade testing? I think I got a movie. So I go and do the race, and it's the most masochistic thing I ever do. I do it clean. I then go back and do it doped. Gregory helps me. I'm evading all the tests. I think I've got a movie, and I'm back in Los Angeles, and it's now November of 2015 after going to Russia and working with him for 2 months after the race, which was September of 2015, and it's now November 5th, 2015. And this massive 300-page report comes out, commissioned by the World Anti-Doping Agency. And there's a backstory behind this report, but the bottom line of this report is it's claiming that Russia has a state-sponsored doping program. And not only that, in 70 pages of this report, it's claiming that my guy, Gregory, is the mastermind behind the entire program. But the report is limited only to track and field and athletics. But it's so damning that by November 10th, Gregory has resigned from the lab. November 11th, the Moscow laboratory is now suspended. And 2 days later, on November 14th, Putin is on television going, all of this is bullshit. But if any of this is true, the individual will be held responsible and punishment will be absolute. And what that was Gregory's death sentence. Because they were going to throw him under the bus and blame the whole thing on him. And I'm Skyping with him back and forth as this is going down. And now he has 2 FSB agents living in his home. And apparently these FSB agents are protecting him. But what they're really doing is there to make sure that he doesn't leave. And he asked me to buy him a ticket to come to Los Angeles. And he had a visa to come to the United States. And at this point I go, this is my friend who I've worked with for 1.5 years. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to help you. So I buy him a ticket. He arrives in Los Angeles. It's 7 days after this scandal comes out. It's November 16th. And he comes carrying 3 hard drives, and he goes, "Put these in a safe place." And I go, "What's this?" And he goes, "You'll find out later." It turns out that not only had Gregory done everything that he said in the report, but he had pulled off the greatest doping scandal in all of sport history. He had actually swapped the urine for every single athlete at the Sochi Olympic Games through a hole in a laboratory wall, breaking into the bottles, an unprecedented fraud. And Russia swept these Sochi Olympic Games with 33 medals. And the information that he gives me, and the evidence, and the data, and the spreadsheets, and the emails going back and forth between the Russian ministry is spectacular. And Gregory wants to become a whistleblower. The problem is how? How is he actually going to become a whistleblower when he was part of this fraud? And he's being hunted in Russia. So we're figuring out what to do. And it's now February 15th, 2016, and I've been sitting on this evidence for about 6 weeks. And FBI agents come knocking on his door. And it's February 15th. And he's been in the country now for 3 months. And his best friend, Nikita Kamayev, the guy who was his co-worker, who was running the Russian anti-doping agency, while Gregory was running the anti-doping laboratory, suddenly, at age 52, dies of a heart attack. And not only does he die of a heart attack, he dies of a heart attack over 3.5 hours, while Gregory is on the phone to his wife at his dacha, his country home, after he went for a run. This guy had never had a heart problem. He had never been to a doctor. He had never had anything wrong with him. And 2 days before his death, he called up Gregory and told Gregory that he had a meeting with David Walsh, the world-famous sports journalist of the Sunday Times in London, and that he was going to tell David Walsh the story of what had happened. So clearly Russia was monitoring his phones and decided to kill him before he could speak to David Walsh. And now we're in a crisis, and we're figuring out what to do, and this is truly life and death. So now it's March 9th, and suddenly FBI agents come and knock on Gregory's little safe house that we've got him in Santa Monica, and he's in a back alley. No one would ever find him, but somehow the FBI has found him. And they serve him with the subpoena to appear in front of the grand jury of the United States. Now, when they serve him this subpoena, we've now since learned to believe that Russian intelligence had keyed off the Justice Department, hoping that they would realize that Gregory, this criminal mastermind who wanted to be a whistleblower, is in the country, and then he would be extradited back to Russia once they found out or whatever of his crimes. And we realize that we are in a crisis now. Our guy who has fled to the United States to seek asylum, to basically tell the truth against the Russian regime of this program that had spanned for 40 years, is on the cusp of going into the grand jury in the United States. And even though they don't realize what's happened, he's not going to lie in front of them. And once he goes in there and testifies, they will start understanding the scope of this scandal. But at the same time, they don't have jurisdiction over it. So what are they going to do? So we sit and we meet with lawyers, and we hire strategy consultants and PR consultants, and we hatch a plan that our only chance is to go to the New York Times. So exactly 6 days before he's supposed to testify to the grand jury, we sit down with the New York Times, and 2 reporters come out to Los Angeles, and I sit there with Gregory, and we have a 300-page dossier compiled of all the evidence. And we sit there with the 2 reporters from the New York Times and lay out this story moment by moment over about 24 hours of investigation. And literally, while Gregory is testifying in front of the grand jury, this is on the front page of the New York Times. And they blow up the story, and it becomes a 2-page spread. And the next day, it's on the front page again with another 2-page spread. Needless to say, the Department of Justice is very frustrated, but now Gregory is actually a whistleblower and not under investigation. So now an entire global scandal has been unveiled. It's all over the news channels, all over the world, and we're in a whole other crisis. And the crisis becomes, how do we protect Gregory? How do we actually keep this guy safe? How do we keep him alive? And while we're figuring this out, we're realizing that back in Russia, they've hacked my phone and my emails. That photo nobody would have had other than me. And that's a selfie of me and Gregory, and we're on Russia 1. That's an email that I sent to Gregory. They had Gregory under total surveillance, and every single time he was calling his sister, they were listening in on the phone calls and then putting it out on Russia 1. So this is getting incredibly scary. And all the while, we're negotiating with the Department of Justice of how to bring him into protective custody. He's now being called Putin's public enemy number 1. And a month before the Olympics, we negotiate with the Department of Justice and the FBI to bring him into protective custody. That's him getting his fingerprints taken. And as he's sitting in protective custody, Richard McLaren puts out the findings of his report, the final report, and it's not anything and 10 times bigger than anything would imagine. He states that the scandal included at least 1,000 athletes and went back as far as he could ever tell, meaning that every single medal that Russia won in the Olympic Games was a fraud. This changed all of sport history. Of course, Putin denied this entire scandal, and to this day has denied this scandal and blamed it on one man. And then in January of 2017, if you remember, the FBI, the NSA, and the CIA releases their report into why the American election was hacked, and they listed 7 reasons. And reason number 3 was they believed that it was Putin's revenge for America's exposing Russia's doping scandal, which of course America really had nothing to do with this. But Putin believed because Gregory had went to the United States, because he was now in protective custody, because the New York Times ran the story, and that he couldn't fathom that the United States was not under state-controlled media, that of course this was the U.S. government behind it. But here we are, and even with all of this evidence put forward, and Icarus having been released in the world, Russia is still going to the Olympics, because the Olympic organization itself is as much of a fraud as the Russian doping scandal. They don't want to expose this. They don't want to punish Russia, because God knows what Putin has on Thomas Bach, the president of the Olympics. So we're sitting there going, holy shit, look at this scandal. And here the world is failing to act. So 3 months before the Olympic Games, we release pages from Gregory's diaries. Now, the genius is that Gregory had been keeping diaries for 45 years, every single day of his life. And these diaries were like, I woke up today, heart rate 105, had pierogi, walked my dog took big poo, went to laboratory, swapped urine for 15 athletes. Then called Minister Mutko. Mutko told me to destroy samples. So these diaries were forensically proven, and they were so mind-blowing that the Olympics had to do something. So they banned Russia from the Winter Games last year, 2018 in Pyeongchang. And now things are getting incredibly scary. Putin asks Trump to extradite Gregory. He discusses a trade for Snowden. He appears on his state media address and basically says that the United States government had drugged Gregory and that this was the work of intelligence officers. And not only that, this was the United States trying to interfere in his upcoming presidential election. Vitaly Mutko, who was the sports minister, is elevated to the vice president, the deputy prime minister in Russia, in light of the sports scandal, to get him out of harm's way. And he starts commenting on the diaries, going that the diaries were written in 6 months. Putin comments on the diaries, saying that the diaries are the only evidence regarding the existence of systematic doping in Russia, even though we had provided thousands of pages of evidence and Richard McLaren had forensically proven all the evidence through FBI investigators, CIA investigators, international laboratories. And then at his press conference just in the very beginning of 2019, he literally comes out and says he should be put in prison. So this is far from over. And what this brings up is really the cost of blowing the whistle and the cost that all of us sitting in this room face in the work that we're doing of trying to fight oppressive governments, of trying to tell the truth in basically an era of deceit, in an era where we go, wait, this shouldn't happen, but it is happening. And wait, he should be safe in the United States, but he's not safe. Wait, somebody should be able to come out and tell the truth against their government and not face a fear of threat for the rest of their lives. This is his attorney, and every single time he goes to visit the client, he puts on a blindfold and is driven 2 hours somewhere in a car to a secret location. This is Gregory, his daily life. If he ever goes out, he's under armed guards with AK or semi-automatic guns, wearing a bulletproof vest. He lives in 24/7 isolation under security, under the protection of the U.S. government, because Russia has made it clear that they want to kill him. Not only that, if you remember about 9 months ago in the United States, 9 Russian agents were expelled. And his attorney received intelligence from the CIA that 2 of those agents were in the United States hunting Gregory. The guy just received his political asylum, which is a miracle. And there's a whole story behind that because Russia tried to charge him with drug trafficking, which is an international crime and immediately makes someone ineligible for political asylum. But 2 years later, he's able to get his asylum. But all that he has is a huge target on his back. And the cost for him telling the truth is to live in fear for the rest of his life. And in the film, if you happen to see it, we latched on to the themes of Orwell in 1984. Because even though this book was written in the 1950s, everything that Orwell wrote is happening today. Doublethink. Basically, leaders of the world keep repeating lies and lies and lies and lies until they become the truth, until they're able to reverse history. And what Russia has done, even in the light of this scandal, is seek every single thing they can to reverse history. There were 40 Russian athletes banned for life. So far, they've been able to reverse 28 of those bans. And Russia is succeeding day by day by day of lying and lying and lying until it becomes the truth. While Gregory, the whistleblower, sits in isolation 24/7, waiting for, like a dog, to be let out of his apartment, to be walked with a bulletproof vest. And this will be his life. And the irony is, for exposing this story, I win the Academy Award, which was an incredible honor and an incredibly humbling moment, but also one that I found startling, because here my friend will never have his freedom, will never get to stand on that stage, will never get to be free for telling the truth. And in October, Gregory turned 60 years old, and I was able to arrange through the Department of Justice and the FBI, there was a secret 60th birthday party with him, and I hadn't seen my friend at that point for going on 2 years, and I was able to celebrate his 60th birthday with him. And the moral of the story is his life is forever in jeopardy, and that, sadly, is the cost of telling the truth in 2019, even as we sit in Norway. Thank you very much.
We can't ask you that you exit the today's break. Our final session will begin at 11:30.